Hi everyone, welcome to episode 99 of the ITSM crowd. We're continuing our evolution of service management theme, and today our guests are going to talk about the rise of new practices like DevOps and Agile and the impact that that's had on more traditional service management setups. And I'm sure many of you that are watching will have experienced some of the friction that this can bring into an organization. So we're going to start with some introductions. I'm going to ask our guests to just tell us a little bit about themselves, and then we'll kick off into today's topic. So, Karen, I'll come to you first, please.
Thanks, Claire, and nice to speak to all of you. My name's Karen, obviously. I've been in service management for about 20 odd years now, been in IT for almost 30, so I'm definitely giving my age away. And also gone through the evolution of on-premise, old dial-up lines from a modem perspective, all the way through to now where we are with cloud technology and the ability to be agile and all of the pressures that that's also bringing to bear on your service management teams and on your IT teams in general. So hopefully we've got something of value to add to you all today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Helen.
Hi, yes, my name is Gielen. I've been working in IT for over 15 years, I think now, but before that, I work in the provision of services and products, not necessarily in IT. It was banking, actually. But anyway, overall, that experience did help a lot when I moved to IT. And in service management, I suppose I should mention, because I probably will keep talking about it, that I am very passionate about defining what the services and the products are as the core thing. So yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And my name's Claire Agutter. I'm the host for today's session. Just to remind those of you that are watching us live, you can put your questions to Karen and Helen using YouTube comments. If you pop those in, we'll see them here. We can bring them up on screen. So if you've got any questions you want to ask or even experiences that you want to share, then we'd really love to hear from you as well. We love that interaction. So I guess the first question to ask you both is, why are we talking about this now? What's the kind of point that we've reached where we need to start to think about how DevOps and, I don't want to say legacy service management, but more traditional service management works together? Why is this important for organizations?
Shall I go
I know,
first,
Karen.
Helen?
Yeah, Karen, I can see
Cool.
you want to say something, say it. Yeah.
um, I think, having come from the traditional service management background, if you think all the way back to ITIL V2, where you did service delivery and service support, and then you went into lifecycle management with ITIL V3, and then we saw the introduction and we just never seem to have kept up to date, or there's always been some conflict between service management and the business. It's been seen as separate, and now it's, at the end of the day, IT is the business for most companies, and so service
Mhm.
management needs to get with the program and start sort of adopting business practices and understanding the business requirements a little bit better. If you think about the old ways of adopting service management, I think a lot of companies adopted, I'm going to talk to ITIL in particular, in a very prescriptive way.
Mhm.
And if you think about the CAB, for example, instead of it being a change advisory board, which is what ITIL always intended it to be, it became a change approval board or a change control board. And so
Mhm.
it was brought in a very different way. And I think you're seeing friction now in organizations that are moving to the cloud. You're seeing friction within organizations where you've got strong software development lifecycle processes in place being obstructed by what they see as a control that's no longer necessary. So I think it's a combination of, we need to move with the times, and technology has matured so much that you can actually do most of what change control does or change authority does by building that into the application or the solution that you're providing to your customers. So I think the time is right for it.
Yeah, I think I like the fact that Karen highlighted the change advisory board, because I
Mhm.
always find interesting how loads of the definitions were right to start with, but somehow I don't know even know why we kind of went a bit sidetracked. I think it was maybe because of how technology, because I think the components that make up a service were more or less components, they were not necessarily treated as products or as an amalgamation of components, etc. So time was not, or sufficient time was not spent on understanding what the product services are and what value they add, because the focus was on what are these CIs and specific components. I may not understand altogether the end-to-end picture, but it don't matter, because as an IT provider, my responsibility is the stability, the capability, all around the components, without a real understanding of the business and how they consumed it and how they got the value. And then I think on that same note, like change advisory, I always say it's interesting how we are in service management, but we manage services. But when you talk to loads of people, they actually don't know what is it that the services that they manage. They can call out the technology that they're responsible for, but when you ask them, right, what does that underpin, how does that relate to a value stream for the business, they cannot really articulate it. And that's interesting, and that's always been the case. And I think now it's just more apparent, and I suppose the impact of not understanding can be felt in a different way, because of what Karen highlighted. IT is the business. Everything is enabled by technology in one way or another. So that separation no longer works as it is.
Yeah. So, because I think that's very, very interesting, because one of the things that I want to get your thoughts on is how sort of, again, traditional, I'll use that word without meaning any negative connotation, but people with an IT service management background, how they should respond to DevOps and agile practices being introduced into the organization. But do you think maybe some of the areas like service portfolio management, service catalog management, are they more important than ever in order to navigate this changing world?
I would say so, yes, because it's just what is on that portfolio and that catalog is different from what was there before, because those components have changed quite a lot. And now we're talking about microservices and APIs and etc. Then there needs to be kind of a revisit of what is it that what underpins. So we have an end-to-end view of the value chain for the business and how IT interacts with it. But then we have an understanding of what the services are. And this is where interesting concepts come, like platform as a product, like building products that the business can consume from your platform. So you provide a platform, and then that platform is ready for the business to consume whatever they need, whenever they need it, without so many constraints and without like a change advisory board that will go, no, this go, no go. That is not there anymore. It's like, I find it, so interesting, like how before I would sit there in a meeting and I would like, right, go, no go. It's like, well, you cannot do that in cloud. It's already, with the cloud, it's already gone. Like, we're talking about it and it's already happened. So the definition of the services and the cataloging of those services and the making those accessible to the right people to consume is super relevant. And I think this is where our service management brings a lot of value, because as a service manager, this is what we're good at. So I think it's important for people to realize that the value of service management has not decreased. It's just that what we need to concentrate on and do, it has changed. And with change, and I know Karen has some experience on the change specific and the controls around it. I let her talk about it. But and it's a definition of services. We are the ones that can articulate. I think we are that glue in between the business and IT still, because you may have your DevOps functions with your very technical capability. They might not necessarily be in a position where they can articulate a service and a product to the business in a way that the business would understand. So we still need to be there. We almost like that glue and the translators in my mind.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And if I look at some of the teams and projects that I've been working on, and I use the word projects carefully because obviously project has different connotations. If you think about the old way of doing it, it's changed completely now. But it's from a business and IT perspective, it's no longer an IT project, it's a business project. and you have to have business representation in there, and the business has to understand how IT works, but IT also has to recognize that the old way of doing change management, for example, is not going to work. And to Gielen's point around platform as a service, for example, where you can put something onto a platform that's fully managed, and the only thing you really have to manage is your data, maybe a couple of APIs, and some backup stuff. It's when you think about change in that type of environment, the immediate reaction from change managers is, "Oh, I want to approve every change on the platform," and you go, "Sorry, dudes, you can't do it that way anymore." And it becomes a way of making of helping people to understand that their role is changing, that they need to look much further ahead in terms of roadmaps, for example, at a platform level, and focus on those bigger things rather than on the smaller changes, because essentially you're moving to a way of consuming those products in a much more agile, flexible way. If you just think about a mobile phone, for example, we don't get the chance to turn around and tell Samsung or Apple we're not going to take the latest update. So it's the same type of thinking, and it's moving IT to that consumer way of providing service, that the consumers are providing that service, are consuming that service from us, and we need to enable it. And I read something very interesting, and I just can't remember which book I read it in. I'll try and remember before the end of the day. But it's no longer about empowering your IT staff. It's about stopping to disempower them. It's stop disempowering rather than empowering, because what the old ITIL way of doing things, or the way that it was applied in many organizations, disempowered people. And so now it's a case of you're now empowering your developers to go and build and to test earlier, and to build all the security requirements, all the governance requirements in so much earlier, so that at the end of the day, change is just there so you have a record of what has changed, rather than to say yes or no. And it goes back to what Gielen said about platform and software as a service too. You don't have the opportunity to say no in those environments. So it's moving to adopting a similar mindset, even for your home developed apps within your organization. And that's a big change in thinking. It's a massive paradigm shift. And there's always lots of friction and lots of fear because it's new.
Yeah, we used to focus a lot on the processes, and the processes were quite prescriptive. And sometimes we went into a lot of detail. So you do this, then you do that, and it was very prescriptive on the way. And I was one that would loved writing those processes that no one would read, and then I would get super angry at the fact that people was not following them. I was very picky and all. But I've come to a realization that you need to move on. So it's no more about prescriptive process. It's about guidelines, those guardrails, those controls, and ensuring that people is aware of what they are, and then letting them innovate and letting them work within those guardrails. And you don't have to be prescriptive about click here and then you do this. There is no need to anymore. And it's about what that Karen was mentioning. It's about the change, the shifting of the embedding controls and embedding them. And this is where service management has a lot of value, because quite often when you speak to a technical person in engineering or something, they might not necessarily know which controls need to be added or what do we mean by controls. In their mind, they're thinking technical controls, but we have other things in mind. I don't know, we want things to be named correctly. We want things to be tagged. We want things, they may not think about that because it's not a requirement for them. They just want to develop some code that fulfills some functionality. They're not thinking, oh, how would I then present that on a catalog? And so that's where our value comes. We are the ones that define what those controls are and can give them the direction.
Yeah, and that's a really important point I think you've touched on there, because you do read these articles about, do we even need an IT department anymore? What's IT doing when we've got all these low code, no code things out there? And of course that is what we're doing, is providing the guardrails and the governance. Because I put my hand up. I was a change manager kind of, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago. And we were the same. We had the cabs, we talked about things, but we did it because there wasn't any other way to do it.
Exactly.
We didn't have CI/CD pipelines. We didn't have the level of automation that you have now. So that was the way we we did it at the time, and if we were doing it now, we would do it very differently.
Exactly. And there was a very different time, was it? You had to have like a rollback plan. And then you had all
Yes.
your steps listed. And then I will click this button and then I will do this. And it's like, have you tested this? Are you sure it would work? But we moved on from that. And that's the beauty of what we have now, and the pipelines and the ability to build controls and policies and guardrails in whatever cloud is in use. And I think another value of service management is that we acknowledge and we know about hybrid. We know that most organizations have cloud and on-prem, and that will be the case for a long while. So it's not that we're suggesting, oh, all of a sudden you're going to be 100% on a new way of working. So it's about finding a way that it all works together and those interactions can still happen. So
Yeah, I think that's a very strong point that Gielen is making too, because you still have the old legacy ITIL way of doing things on premise, and trying to migrate to a new way of working in the cloud. You know, as she said, for some while you're going to have organizations that run both. And I think the old ways, if you think about the old ways of developing a service, and to her point earlier about all of the components, you would have different work streams responsible for different parts of that service that was going to be delivered as part of a project. And it could take 6 months to a year, or in some cases even longer. And by the time the project was delivered, the business case had changed. Whereas with the ability to use the services that you've got now in the cloud, you actually start developing a minimum viable product and building on that, and using old techniques like the Moscow analysis, for example, to say it must have this, should have, would have, could like it, could have, and build those into iterations, MVP 1 through to however many iterations you need. And the design is to build something that will fail fast and recover fast, not be completely 100% resilient, which is almost like a contradiction in the way that you want to manage your services. Especially if you're a big organization and you've got masses of customer data, you obviously need to protect that as well. So that's, again, comes into all of that security and governance being built into it. But so you're actually going anti what we've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years, and it's a massive change in thinking and causes a lot of conflict and a lot of friction within teams, never mind within organizations. So
yeah. And is growth exponentially what you need to worry about? Because all of a sudden it's your services and the management, is your product centricity and the how you manage products. But then you need to think about user experience too, which maybe wasn't something you considered as much before, because it's part of the journey. And then you need to think about this whole end to end. And then you have the DevOps. And so you need to start as a service manager to gain an understanding on. You don't need to become a DevOps engineer, and you wouldn't probably, but you need to understand how the pipelines work, what type of controls can be embedded, and what do we mean by that? How do we shift left? And products, how do we manage products? What is the best practice around managing products? And how do I marry that to my service management knowledge? And I love that Karen mentioned Moscow before, because I come from a business analysis background, and I am a strong believer on building up your business analysis techniques so that you can apply them to service management. Maybe because we often talk about things like value streams. And yeah, you have your value streams. Everyone talks about it. And I'm like, yeah, but how do you get to mapping out that value stream? You need to apply some value chain analysis so that you can, because which most IT organizations, let's face it, have never done. Because why would you? So you need to start there. Do you actually understand what is the value chain for the business that you serve? And do you understand what's the value chain for you as IT? And then now let's break it down. And it is a lot of work, but it's work that needs to happen. It's just not, we cannot, unfortunately, run away from it. So yeah, it's a lot of change. And I think as IT has changed, we as service managers just need to change too, but we're still managing services.
Yeah. And I think one of the most frequent bits of pushback I hear from, it's mainly organisations who work in regulated space, so things like gaming, the finance industry, and they say, oh, all this DevOps is great, but we still need the bits of paper to show the auditors. We need the audit trail, we need the paperwork. Is that something that you've come across?
Yes.
Definitely. I mean, I'm actually experiencing that at the moment. And I think that forms part of resistance to change as well within organizations, because they hide behind the regulation. And you can understand it. It's fear. You obviously don't want to have your reputation damaged as an organization because you've contravened a regulation. But if you look at the technology that we've got, you can build all of that regulation in so that, for example, you can't deploy a non-compliant device. So if somebody tries to do it and it doesn't meet policy, you won't be able, using policy as code, for example, you won't be able to deploy that device. So the the big tech companies have considered all of those things. It's just the appetite is growing, but it's that fear that stops it, and it does cause a little bit of resistance. And so it's just being able to go in and say, well, have you considered trying it this way? And again, it comes down to, don't try and it's a very big elephant. Don't try and eat it all in one go. You need to break it up into small chunks and put it into small prints. And it's almost like doing proof of concepts, and sometimes begging forgiveness instead of asking permission. When you can do that obviously within reason, you've got to be safe about doing that. But it's a massive challenge. And especially if you think about all the COVID regulations, for example, or the COVID policies, from a governance perspective, you can build all of that stuff, all of your ISO 27000 stuff, your 38500, you can build all of that into the policies that you use to manage the tech that then provides your services. So there are ways to get around it. It's just when people start thinking about it, they get overwhelmed.
Yeah. And then it's the evidence in that. So just
Yes.
think about your end-to-end, and then think about your personas in that end-to-end. And then for a moment, do something as simple as say, right, I am the auditor. What is it that I will expect to see? Because I will not be going into the detail behind, or I might not be able to, I won't be looking at policies specifically. So once they're set up and all of that capabilities being built, which Karen mentioned, then it's about, okay, now I need to present these in a way that the audience, the auditors, can consume it. So it still needs, unfortunately, documenting, but it's where you document it. Is it a wiki, or is it just a library that you have online where you specify this is the controls that we are adhering to, and they are applied technically, and the evidence can be found this way. You don't have to be like chapter and verse, but it's just a summary, and it's there, and then it's backed up by the policies and all the technical capability behind it. So yes,
sorry,
yes,
I was interrupting you.
Thinking about audiences, that's all I was gonna say. Yeah.
And a lot of people will say to you, oh, but the auditor is going to nail us for this because it's different. You as an organization have the power to determine how that auditor is going to audit you. You've got to do it within regulations. So it's reworking some of the policies or the standards that you use, and making sure that you, as Gielen said, making sure that you can evidence that the controls are still there, they're just in a different place.
Yes.
So, and change is a good example of that. Previously, auditors would come and assess your change management process. All they were doing was checking that you'd made sure all the dots, that the T's and the I's were dots and crossed. They weren't necessarily actually checking that things had been done properly, if you think about it. Whereas now you have the opportunity to build all of that into your actual code, and that's far more secure. So yeah, you're right, it's personas and audience as well, and just reminding yourself, we have the power within our hands to actually change this. And it's that empowering yourself almost, and talking with confidence and showing the business that this is how we can do it, and you'll get their buy-in if you can actually show them that you've thought it through.
So for people who watch this who tend to be from a service management background, if we've got people working in change management or transition, what would you recommend them to do in their organization in terms of their own personal skills? How do service managers evolve themselves?
That's a very good question. So at a personal, at least, I would strongly suggest that they familiarize with the DevOps world. And by that, I mean, not necessarily, I mean, it depends where you are, obviously. Yeah, you will read about Agile and the manifesto and DevOps and what is, but what I mean is more the how does it actually work? So pipelines, continuous integration and continuous delivery, what does that mean? And what can it do? How does it work? And then immediately you will see as a service manager things in there that you will identify as something you would worry about, like changes and how they track then in this pipeline. And then you that will help you then gain an understanding of what then are your requirements as a change manager, so that you can give to the right team, so that controls can be created and then they can be embedded, and there's that shift to left, so you don't wait for things to happen to then ask, have you done it? Should already be being done, as part of the change, is part of the pipeline. And that would be for me the main thing, because I think as a general rule, service managers sometimes don't spend a lot of time. It's not that they don't spend a long time, but they may be looking at DevOps and more be looking at the manifesto and what it means, but try and look a bit at the tech and the pipelines and how the engineers work and the language they speak, which can be quite complex. But yeah, what products are they creating and what do these products do, which takes time? Microservices, these APIs, what does that mean? And who's good? Yeah, because it's true, because it's not something we were talking about before. And then we go into these meetings and everyone's talking about these microservices and blah, blah, blah. And then just take some time to understand those things better.
Yeah,
that would
I
be
think
my
brilliant advice.
I think to support Gielen too, I mean, if you sit with a team that already is mature from a CI/CD pipeline perspective too, unpack what they do, document it, go back and ask lots of questions, especially if you're a change manager, because all of a sudden you'll realize that all of the things that you were concerned about, you actually don't need to be concerned about. I mean, I know of one case where changes were taking 3 weeks to get through to production, and now that particular team is deploying changes every 7 minutes in a financial institution. So when you start thinking about that significant change, that can be adopted, and again, you just do it in small bite-sized chunks. To support what Gielen said too, I think also I did ITIL V4 my manager's transition last year. And I think the ITIL V4 Foundation has got quite a lot of useful information because it introduces DevOps and the value chain. So I think anyone who really wants to give themselves some more academic type knowledge, have a look at ITIL V4 Foundation, and then maybe do the high velocity IT, because that talks all about lean, agile, scrum, CI/CD pipelines, all of the stuff that we've just been talking about. You'll find a lot of useful information in there, which I think will really help just to inform service management staff about what is out there that's maybe new to them that they need to keep themselves abreast of. And I mean, there are other things that people can do too, like reading some of the books that we suggested. Like I found when I was first embarking on this to read the Phoenix Project, which was a fictionalized account of an IT department, and you recognize every single IT person will recognize themselves in that book. So, and it's very light and it's a bit daft sometimes, but it gets the message across. And then the other books that I also recommended are things that from Rob England and Cherry Vu, the Agile Manager Small A. That's turning IT around on its head and becoming servant leaders and allowing people, empowering people or no longer disempowering them. Those books are really, really useful. And I've just started reading Sooner, Safer, Happier by Jonathan Smart and his colleagues whose names I don't remember all of them. He's really good to follow on LinkedIn as well. He's always publishing really interesting articles that make you think. And the DevOps Handbook, of course, is really, really useful. And John Cutler on Twitter at John Cuttlefish is really interesting to follow, because it's not just about what he puts on Twitter, it's about all of the responses that he gets that then lead you down a bit of a rabbit hole, but you learn when you're going down that rabbit hole. So those are things I think I would encourage people to look at. And I know Gielen's got some recommendations as well.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
just pop Gielen's up on screen because we are unfortunately out of time.
Yes.
I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but that was so interesting. So thank you both so much
Thank
for
you.
that. And the thing that I'd add as well is, most meetups are virtual now. Get yourself to some DevOps meetups as well, because I spent a lot of time doing that, and
Yeah.
it's a bit daunting sometimes going in with your ITIL t-shirt on, but they're a really friendly bunch, so
Yeah,
definitely
get that
recommend
t-shirt
that as
out.
Yes.
well.
Get it out again. It's
All
cool
your
too. It's
badges.
fine. Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
I would say just briefly, just expand your horizon and think also enterprise architecture. Look at things like TOGAF, IT for IT, Verism. It don't matter what best practice, but you can gain a lot of value from them all. And then, yes, expand your knowledge on the technicalities of it. So those books I particularly really like. Team Topologies is about how you organize for fast flow, and it's a specific approach that is suggested in the book, which is really good. And then Accelerate, which is about agility and acceleration, and fast flow too. There is many others, but yeah.
And notice we didn't mention agile at all.
No, we didn't.
We'll
Till
do
the
Apart
it
end.
from the
next
small
time.
A.
Yeah. Fine.
Yeah.
But the next episode of the ITSM crowd is not far away. It's our 100th episode, which is baffling to me. So more than 5 years we've been doing this now, which it is just astonishing. We do have Rob England, who Karen mentioned his book, he's joining us, and Peter McKenzie. We're going to have the great framework debate. So we're going to be talking about the value of frameworks, when they're useful, when they're not useful, the career progression and the education that you need as a service management professional, and just really pick apart some of these ideas. So that's going to be an excellent episode. Recommend watching that one live if you can, and popping
Definitely.
questions into
Those
that.
sounded, yes. Yeah, I'll be there.
I can't wait for that one. But Karen, Gielen, thank you so much for your time today. Hugely appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's been watching us as well. We will see you on the next episode of the ITSM crowd. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having
the
us.
opportunity.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.